He thought she was just a waitress with a sharp mouth and tired eyes. But before the night was over, Adrian Romano was about to learn what dignity looked like when it refused to kneel. The chandelier light above Belafonte shimmered over crystal glasses, polished silver, and the kind of old money silence that only existed in rooms where people believed the world had been built for them. Zuri Bennett moved through it all with practiced precision, black apron tied neat at her waist, order pad tucked in one hand, chin lifted just enough to remind herself that carrying plates for people with expensive watches did not make her small. The dinner rush had hit hard at 7:15 p.m., every table full, every server stretched thin, and the air smelled like rosemary, butter, and wine that cost more per bottle than Zuri's electric bill. She had already smiled through 3 rude comments, 2 fingers snapped in her direction, and 1 man who called her sweetheart like he had purchased the right. But Zuri had rules, even here. She would do her job well. She would not bend her spine for cruelty. And she would not let anybody confuse service with surrender. At the center table, beneath the warm gold light, sat Adrian Romano. Even without the whispers, she would have known he was the kind of man people moved around carefully. He wore a charcoal suit so perfectly cut, it looked like it belonged to him the way shadow belongs to midnight. And he carried stillness the way other men carried noise. He wasn't laughing with the others at his table. He wasn't checking his phone. He was simply watching, his pale hand resting near a glass of sparkling water, his face composed like carved stone, as if the whole restaurant existed 3 steps beneath him. Zuri had heard the name before, of course. Everybody in Manhattan had. Adrian Romano. The man with blue eyes too calm for someone so powerful. The man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. The man people feared in ways they pretended not to. She had no interest in him. Men like that came with polished shoes, private rooms, and the expectation that the world would soften itself on command. Zuri preferred people who said please and meant it. She was crossing past table 12 when the trouble began. A woman in pearls and a white silk jacket lifted her hand without looking up from her conversation. "Excuse me," she said, the words dipped in sugar and sharpened underneath. "I asked for still water, not sparkling. Is that too difficult to remember?" Zuri stopped, turned, and gave the kind of professional smile that cost energy she did not have. "I'm sorry about that, ma'am. I'll replace it right away." She reached for the glass, but the woman pulled it back with a small, theatrical sigh. "Honestly," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "standards are just gone everywhere." A few people glanced over. The woman's friends smirked into their wine. Zuri felt the heat rise in her chest, that old familiar burn that came when someone tried to make her feel like a stain in a room she was helping hold together. She could walk away. She should walk away. But then the woman looked up, let her gaze travel over Zuri's dark skin, her simple uniform, her name tag, and smiled the kind of smile that had nothing kind in it. "You girls are always so bold these days," she murmured. The room did not gasp. No one ever did in moments like that. They just went quiet and let the insult breathe. Zuri stood very still, one hand wrapped around the edge of her tray, her pulse hammering in her ears. Then she straightened fully, met the woman's eyes, and answered in a voice calm enough to cut glass. Only when someone mistakes respect for weakness. The words landed clean. A fork paused halfway to a mouth. Somewhere behind her, a chair shifted softly. And at the center table, Adrian Romano finally looked at her, as if for the first time all night. For one suspended second, Belafonte seemed to forget how to breathe. The woman in pearls blinked as if no one had ever spoken to her that way before, and the men at her table suddenly found intense interest in their plates. Zuri did not wait for permission to leave. She lifted the wrong bottle of water from the linen cloth, replaced it with the right one from her tray, and set it down with a steady hand that betrayed none of the heat still rising through her chest. "Still water, ma'am," she said, polite enough to give nothing back, firm enough to take nothing away. Then she turned before the woman could answer, because she had learned years ago that the cruelest people fed on hesitation. She crossed the dining room under the hush of candlelight and low jazz, each step measured, each breath controlled, but she could feel it, the attention. It followed her like a spotlight she had not asked for. Not the curiosity of the diners. His. Adrian Romano's gaze was a physical thing now, calm and cool and impossible to ignore, and when Zuri disappeared through the service doors into the kitchen, It came with her in the form of a silence she could still feel at the back of her neck. The kitchen was all steam, stainless steel, and sharp movement, the complete opposite of the velvet stillness outside. Pans hissed. Orders were called. A dishwasher laughed too loudly at something nobody had time to hear. Zuri set the tray down beside the espresso station and braced both palms against the counter for exactly 3 seconds. No more. That was the deal she had made with herself after her mother got sick. Feel it, then move. Her mother used to say dignity was not loud. It was what you held on to after life had tried to make you set it down. Zuri had held on to it through hospital waiting rooms that smelled like bleach and coffee, through double shifts that left her feet aching in cheap black shoes, through the stack of envelopes on the kitchen table in her apartment in Harlem, each one asking for money she did not yet have. Rent, utilities, the payment plan for her mother's medication, tuition books for her younger brother, Micah, who still believed hard work was a staircase instead of a treadmill. She worked at Bellefonte because the tips were good, because the rich paid best when they were trying to look generous, and because every Friday she could send enough to keep her family one more week above water. She did not come here to be admired. She came here to survive without letting survival rewrite her spine. "You okay?" asked Elena from guard manger, not looking up from the salad station. Zuri grabbed a clean cloth and nodded. "I am fine." Elena snorted softly. "That means you are not fine." Zuri almost smiled. "I said what I said." "You really did." There was half a warning in Elena's voice, half awe. "That table is connected." Zuri reached for the order slip tower and started sorting checks with fingers that had regained their rhythm. "Everybody in this room is connected," she said. "That does not make them right." But even as she said it, the manager, Trevor, appeared in the doorway to the dining room with his jaw locked tight and his tie slightly crooked, which meant trouble. He scanned the kitchen, found Zuri, and motioned once. Not sharp, not casual either. Controlled, careful, the kind of careful people used when a powerful guest had made a request. "Table 7. Elena whispered. Zuri wiped her hands on her apron, lifted her chin, and walked toward him. Trevor lowered his voice the moment she reached him. "Romano wants you on his table now," he said. "Personally." The kitchen noise blurred at the edges. Zuri looked past him through the narrow glass panel in the service door and saw Adrian still seated beneath the amber light, one hand resting beside his untouched water, his expression unreadable from across the room. He was not smiling. He was waiting. And for the first time that night, Zuri Bennett had the uneasy feeling that the real trouble had not started with the woman in pearls. It had started when the most powerful man in the room finally decided he wanted to hear her speak again. Zuri had served governors, hedge fund wives, actors pretending not to want attention, and men who wore entitlement like cufflinks, but none of them had ever made Trevor look afraid. He stepped aside and held the service door for her, as if she were walking into weather. "Just be careful," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. Zuri almost laughed at that. Careful was how she lived. Careful was checking the pharmacy app before buying groceries. Careful was stretching one subway card through the week and pretending exhaustion was the same thing as peace. Careful was not the issue. The issue was Adrian Romano, seated beneath a halo of amber light in a room designed to flatter power, watching her approach with the kind of stillness that made other people reveal too much. She picked up a fresh bottle of sparkling water from the station, smoothed the front of her apron once, and crossed the floor. Around him sat 3 men in expensive suits, each polished in a different way, each speaking less now than before. Whatever conversation had been there had thinned out the moment Adrian decided to wait for her. Up close, he looked even less like the rumors and somehow more dangerous for it. Not because there was hardness in him, though there was. Not because his face was too composed, his suit too immaculate, his pale blue eyes too unreadable. It was because he seemed entirely unhurried. Men who had nothing to prove were one thing. Men who never expected resistance were another. Zuri stopped beside the table and lifted the bottle slightly. "Would you like a refill, sir?" Adrian looked at the label, then at her, as if the water had never been the point. "Sit down," he said. The men at the table went still. Zuri did not. "I am working," she replied. His gaze did not sharpen, but something in the air did. That was not a suggestion. "Then it is a good thing I do not take orders from customers outside the menu." One of the men let out a sound that might have been a cough and might have been shock. Adrian's expression did not change for a full beat. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth moved. Not enough to be called a smile. Just enough to suggest that something about her refusal interested him more than compliance would have. Pour the water, he said, and answer a question. Zuri filled his glass, the bubbles climbing clean and fast through crystal. One question, she said. Then I go back to my tables. You spoke to Mrs. Delacroix as if you knew exactly where her pride ended and her manners began. His voice was low, smooth, almost conversational, but it carried the kind of attention most people mistook for intimacy. Why? Zuri set the bottle down with care. Because she wanted an audience, not service. Adrian's fingers rested near the base of his glass, long and still. Most people in your position would have apologized. Most people in my position still need to sleep at night. That got a real reaction from the man to Adrian's left, a silver-haired attorney type whose eyebrows rose before he hid the expression behind his napkin. Adrian, however, only studied her more closely, as if she were a line of text he intended to read twice. You are bold, he said at last. No, Zuri answered. I am tired. There is a difference. Silence settled over the table, but it was not empty. It was the kind that stretched because everyone present understood something had shifted, though no one could yet name it. In that moment, Zuri saw the first crack in the polished myth of Adrian Romano. Not warmth, not kindness. Curiosity. Real curiosity, stripped of performance. It made her more cautious than anger would have. Men like him were dangerous when offended. They were far more dangerous when intrigued. He lifted his glass, but did not drink. What is your name? You can read the tag, she said. Humor me. She held his gaze for one impossible second, long enough to feel the weight of the room tilt around them. Zuri Bennett. He repeated it softly, as if testing whether it belonged in his world. Zuri. Then he nodded toward the now empty seat at the far end of the table. Tomorrow night, 8:05. You will serve this table again. Zuri did not glance at Trevor. She did not ask why. I serve whoever is assigned to me. Adrian's eyes lifted to hers, calm as winter glass. You are assigned. The word should have sounded arrogant. They did. But beneath them was something else, something that unsettled her more than command ever could. Certainty. As if he had already rearranged the shape of tomorrow and expected the world to keep up. Zuri picked up the bottle and stepped back from the table. Then I hope your manners improve by 8:05, she said. One of the men stared at her in open disbelief. Adrian watched her for another long second, and this time the faintest trace of amusement reached his eyes. Miss Bennett, he said, just before she turned away. They usually do not. She left the table with her pulse too loud in her ears and the strange, unwelcome awareness that for the first time all night, Adrian Romano had not looked at her like staff. He had looked at her like a problem he wanted to understand. And in Zuri's experience, problems were the only things powerful men ever truly chased. The rest of the shift moved like a watch spring wound too tight. Zuri carried plates through Belafont's golden hush with the same steady hand she always used. But inside, something had changed shape. Not because Adrian Romano had spoken to her. Men with money spoke to women like her every day, usually with entitlement polished to sound like charm. It was because he had listened. That was rarer. More dangerous, too. By 9:30, the dining room had softened into that late evening glow restaurants like to sell as intimacy. Candle flames trembled in cut crystal. Jazz drifted low over the clink of silverware. The city beyond the windows looked distant and expensive, all glass and light, like another world floating just outside reach. Zuri moved between tables with her usual precision, refilling wine, clearing dessert plates, reciting specials she could say in her sleep. But every time she crossed the room, she felt it again, that quiet awareness from table 7. Adrian never called her over again. He did not need to. He was still there when she passed, still and composed, speaking in few words to the men around him, as if the night had resumed its shape for everyone except him. Twice she caught him looking. The first time, when she handed a cappuccino to an elderly couple near the window. The second time, when she bent to retrieve a dropped linen napkin and rose to find those pale blue eyes already on her, calm as cold water. It should have made her uncomfortable. It did. But beneath that discomfort was something she did not like naming. Interest recognized interest, and that was a line she had promised herself never to cross. During her 10-minute break, She slipped out the side entrance into the narrow alley beside the restaurant, where the city smelled like rain on concrete and hot air from kitchen vents. She leaned against the brick wall, pulled out her phone, and checked the numbers she had been avoiding all evening. The pharmacy charge had posted. Her mother's follow-up appointment was confirmed for Thursday at 2 p.m. Micah had texted 30 minutes earlier. Bookstore says I need another lab manual. Sorry. No apology should have been attached to that sentence. But there it was anyway, because poverty trained people to say sorry for existing. Zuri closed her eyes for a moment and tipped her head back against the wall. She pictured her mother at the small kitchen table in Harlem, reading the same church bulletin 3 times because she refused to admit the medication made her tired. She pictured Micah on the uptown train, long legs folded awkwardly, still believing 1 degree could lift all of them. Zuri had made herself a promise the day her mother's doctor said the words treatment plan and monthly cost in the same breath. She would not let the world turn her bitter, and she would not let desperation make choices for her. That included men like Adrian Romano, with their polished shoes and impossible certainty. Especially men like him. You should be flattered, came Trevor's voice from the doorway. Zuri opened her eyes. He stood with one hand on the metal frame, tie loosened now, face pinched with the strain of trying to keep rich people happy for 12 straight hours. By what? She asked. Trevor gave her a look that said he knew exactly by what. He asked for you specifically tomorrow. He never asks twice. Zuri slid her phone back into her apron pocket. Then he should learn disappointment. Trevor let out a humorless laugh. You do not understand how this works. No, she said quietly. You do not understand how I work. He rubbed a hand over his mouth, suddenly tired. Zuri, I am trying to help you. Then do not say yes for me when a man with money points. Trevor looked toward the street, where a black town car idled beneath the curb light. He is not just a man with money. That has never impressed me as much as people think it should. For a second, Trevor said nothing. The alley hummed with distant traffic and the low mechanical roar of Manhattan after dark. Then he lowered his voice. I am serious. Be smart. Zuri's gaze flicked past him toward the waiting car, its windows dark, its engine running with patient confidence. The kind of confidence that assumed everyone it came for would step in eventually. Her jaw tightened. Smart is exactly what I am being. She pushed off the wall and headed back inside before Trevor could answer. When the shift finally ended just after 11, Bellefonte emptied in layers. The last guests drifted out under wool coats and perfume. Chairs were reset. Candles were snuffed. Receipts were counted. Zuri untied her apron in the staff room, folded it once, and reached for her coat. Elena glanced up from her locker. You are not really going to serve him tomorrow, are you? Zuri slid her arms into the sleeves. I serve tables, not fantasies. Elena smiled, but it faded quickly. Men like that do not hear no the first time. Zuri thought of Adrian's expression when she had refused to sit, the slight movement at the corner of his mouth, the way curiosity had sharpened the whole room. He had hurt her. That was the problem. Outside, the air had turned colder. The streetlights cast long pale bars across the sidewalk, and the black town car was still there, as motionless as a promise. Zuri stopped under the awning, heart knocking once hard. The rear passenger door opened before anyone stepped out, slow and silent, as if the night itself had made room. A man in a dark coat emerged from the front seat and approached with professional politeness. Miss Bennett, he said, stopping a respectful distance away. Mr. Romano asked me to give you this. He held out a cream envelope, thick and unmarked. Zuri did not take it right away. And if I do not want it? The driver's expression did not change. Then you can throw it away. She accepted the envelope at last, more out of caution than curiosity, and watched as he returned to the car without another word. The door closed. The car pulled into traffic and disappeared like it had never been there at all. Under the awning, with cold wind moving through the avenue and midnight gathering in the windows above her, Zuri opened the envelope and found a single card inside. Heavy paper. Black ink. 805. Come only if you mean to be honest. No address. No signature. Just certainty, written like it belonged to him. And for the first time since this night had begun, Zuri felt something that looked too much like anticipation slide in beside her caution, quiet and unwelcome and impossible to ignore. Zuri did not throw the card away. That annoyed her more than the card itself. She carried it home in the pocket of her coat all the way uptown, through the metallic shriek of the subway, past tired faces lit blue by phones, past a saxophone player on the platform whose music sounded lonelier after midnight. By the time she reached her apartment building in Harlem, the wind had sharpened and the corners of the envelope had softened from the warmth of her hand. Inside the apartment, the radiator clanked like it had opinions. Her mother had already gone to bed in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, and the television in the living room played softly for no one. Micah sat at the kitchen table under the yellow ceiling light, textbooks spread out around a mug of instant coffee, his broad shoulders bent with the stubborn hope of a 20-year-old who had not yet learned that effort did not always impress the world. He looked up when Zuri stepped in. "Long night?" he asked. "The usual," she said, hanging her coat on the chair. She did not mention the card. She did not mention Adrian Romano. Some names felt too expensive for a kitchen with peeling paint and a grocery list held to the fridge by a church magnet. She checked on her mother first. Dolores Bennett slept on her side beneath a faded blue blanket, one hand tucked under her cheek, her breathing steady but thin. The pill organizer sat on the nightstand beside a glass of water and tomorrow's appointment reminder. Zuri stood there for a moment, letting that familiar ache settle where it always settled, low and quiet and permanent. Love did not always look warm. Sometimes it looked like co-pays and bus schedules and pretending not to count the fruit in the bowl. Back in the kitchen, Micah pushed a notebook aside. "You got that look," he said. "What look?" "The one where somebody with money irritated you and you were deciding whether dignity was worth the tip." Zuri pulled open the fridge and took out the leftover takeout container from 2 nights ago. "Dignity is always worth the tip." He grinned. "That is exactly what Mama would say." She smiled despite herself, then set the container in the microwave and watched the timer glow. 8:05. "Come only if you mean to be honest." The words had followed her home like a second shadow. Honest about what exactly? Honest about being curious? Honest about the fact that for one strange night, a man built of calm and expensive silence had looked at her as if her mind mattered more than her uniform? That was not honesty. That was danger dressed in better tailoring. The next morning arrived gray and thin, Manhattan wrapped in the kind of cold that made the sidewalk shine. Zuri woke after 4 hours of sleep, braided her hair back from her face, helped her mother into a coat for the clinic appointment, and spent the day moving through ordinary burdens that had no patience for mystery. The bus was late. The waiting room smelled like sanitizer and stale coffee. The pharmacy said the insurance issue had not been resolved. By 3 in the afternoon, she had already stood in 2 lines, answered 3 billing questions, and watched her mother smile through pain with a grace that made Zuri want to protect something she could not fix. "Do not wear yourself out over me," Dolores said softly on the ride home, gloved hands folded over her purse. "I am all right." Zuri looked out the window at the blur of traffic and brick and winter coats. "You always say that when you are not." Dolores touched her sleeve. "And you always carry too much because you think love means lifting things alone." Zuri swallowed and said nothing. Mothers had a way of pressing on truths you had hidden even from yourself. By the time she reached Bellefonte for her evening shift, the card was back in her apron pocket, crisp and impossible. Trevor intercepted her near the lockers, his expression already braced. "Private event in the back salon tonight," he said. "You are off the main floor at 8. Zuri stopped. "Excuse me." Request from the top. "I am not on private service rotation." Trevor avoided her eyes, which told her everything. "Tonight you are." Elena, adjusting her earrings in the mirror beside them, muttered, "That man really does not hear no." Zuri tied her apron tighter. "Then tonight he is going to practice." But even she could hear the uncertainty beneath the steel in her voice. At 7:58 p.m., she stood outside the back salon with a tray in her hands and the pulse in her throat beating too fast. The hallway was quieter here, carpet soft underfoot, sconces dimmer, the noise of the main dining room reduced to a distant murmur. Trevor gave her one last nervous look and pushed open the door. The room inside was smaller than she expected, all dark walnut paneling, low candlelight, and a single table set for 2 beside a rain-streaked window. No associates, no lawyers, no spectators. Just Adrian Romano, already seated, jacket off, white shirt open at the collar, one hand resting beside a glass of untouched sparkling water. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time since this strange game had begun, There was no audience left to protect either of them. You came, he said. Zuri stepped into the room and set the tray down with careful hands. I came to work. Adrian's eyes held hers, cool and steady and far too perceptive. No, he said quietly. You came because you wanted to know why I asked for honesty. And standing there in the hush of that private room, with candlelight flickering against polished wood and the storm-dark city watching through the glass, Zuri realized the most unsettling thing of all was that he might have been right. Adrian did not rise when she entered. He did not gesture to the empty chair across from him, did not smile, did not soften the air in the room to make this easier for either of them. He simply watched her with that same impossible stillness, as if patience were not a virtue to him, but a weapon he had learned to wear like a second skin. Rain traced slow lines down the tall window behind him, turning the city lights beyond the glass into blurred gold and white. The private salon smelled faintly of cedar, candle wax, and the espresso cooling on the sideboard. It was the kind of room meant for discretion, the kind rich people used when they wanted intimacy without witnesses. Zuri hated that she noticed any of it. She hated even more that part of her understood this had been arranged with care. Not to impress her, to isolate the truth. She lifted the wine list from the tray and kept her voice even. What would you like to order? Adrian glanced at the menu without touching it. You already know I did not ask for you because of the food. Then you are wasting both of our time. A small sound escaped him, almost a breath of amusement. You say that as if your time is the more valuable one. Zuri set the list down in front of him with quiet precision. Mine cost me more. That landed. She saw it in the slight shift of his expression, not surprise exactly, but recognition. Men like Adrian were used to people answering power with fear or flattery. He got neither from her, and that seemed to sharpen his focus rather than offend it. He leaned back in his chair, one pale hand resting against the armrest, the rolled edge of his white shirt exposing a wristwatch that probably cost more than her mother's treatment for 6 months. Tell me something true, Miss Bennett, he said. Why did you keep the card? Zuri did not blink. I needed something to line my trash can. Adrian's mouth moved at one corner. You are not nearly as dishonest as you would like to be tonight. And you are too comfortable thinking everything is your business. Only the things that walk away while I am still thinking about them. The room went very still. There it was. Not charm. Not even flirtation. Not in the cheap sense she had spent years avoiding with a practiced smile and a turned shoulder. It was something quieter and more dangerous, because it sounded like truth spoken by a man who rarely bothered to explain himself. Zuri folded her hands lightly in front of her apron, giving herself something to control besides her pulse. You asked for honesty, she said. Fine. Here is some. I do not trust men who use other people like furniture. I do not trust men who think attention is a gift. And I do not trust a situation where I am expected to be impressed before I have even been respected. Adrian's eyes did not leave hers. For one beat, then two, he said nothing. At all. The city hummed outside the glass. Somewhere down the hall, a tray clinked faintly. Inside this room, the silence was so exact it felt chosen. Then Adrian sat forward, forearms resting lightly on the table, and for the first time since she had met him, some of the polished distance fell away. Good, he said quietly. Zuri frowned despite herself. Good. Yes. Good. His voice stayed low, steady, almost thoughtful. Because I am not interested in a woman who is impressed easily. I see enough of that every day to know how little it is worth. She studied him, trying to find the trick in it. Men with his kind of power did not reveal weakness. They curated vulnerability the way other people curated art, only when it made them look larger. But there was nothing decorative in his expression now. He looked tired in a way expensive suits could not hide. Not physically, soul tired. Like a man who had spent too long being answered before he had finished asking. Then what are you interested in? She asked before she could stop herself. Adrian glanced toward the candle between them, its small flame bending in the air vent. A woman who can look at everything I am supposed to be and still decide for herself what I am. Zuri felt the words settle somewhere she did not want touched. She thought of her mother's hand on the bus earlier, warm through a thin glove. You always carry too much because you think love means lifting things alone. This was not love. This was something sharper, earlier, less safe. Curiosity with teeth. She straightened. You still have not ordered. Coffee, Adrian said, still looking at her. Black. That is all. For now. Zuri turned toward the sideboard, grateful for the excuse to move, to put steel and porcelain between herself and whatever this was becoming. She poured the coffee into a white cup and saucer, the dark liquid steady despite the uneven beat of her heart. When she placed it before him, Adrian thanked her. Not automatically. Not like rich men said thank you when they wanted to feel well raised. He said it like he meant the specific act, the fact of her being here at all. That unsettled her more than command ever had. One more true thing, he said as she began to step back. Zuri exhaled slowly. You collect truths the way other men collect watches? Only rare ones. She should have walked out then. She knew it. Every survival instinct she had built over the years was tapping at the glass from inside her chest. But there was a storm outside, and a silence inside, and a man in front of her who had just admitted he was tired of being obeyed. So she gave him what he asked for, though not in the way he expected. All right, she said. Here is the truth. If you want my company, you do not get to buy it with private rooms, special assignments, or a driver delivering envelopes to my sidewalk. You do not get to rearrange my job because you are curious. You do not get to make me part of your world and call that a compliment. Adrian held her gaze, the blue of his eyes gone colder and clearer all at once. Not offended. Listening. And if I want to know you anyway? Zuri's chin lifted a fraction. Then you come like a man, not a king. The candle flame moved between them. Rain whispered at the window. Adrian Romano stared at her for a long moment. And then, very slowly, a smile reached his eyes for the first time. It was not triumph. It was recognition. There it is, he murmured. The challenge. The room did not move, but something in it changed. Zuri saw it in the way Adrian's fingers loosened around the porcelain cup, in the way his shoulders settled back not with defeat, but with interest sharpened into something quieter and far more deliberate. Most men would have laughed at her rules or argued with them. Men with power usually did not recognize a boundary unless it came wrapped in fear. Adrian Romano, however, looked at her as if she had just named a language he had been waiting years to hear spoken correctly. Like a man, not a king, he repeated, almost to himself. The candlelight traced one side of his face in gold and left the other in shadow, carving his features into something both elegant and severe. He had the kind of face magazines would call handsome and sensible women would call dangerous. Zuri preferred neither word. Handsome was too soft. Dangerous was too flattering. What sat across from her was a man used to getting his way so completely that resistance felt novel to him. That made him more complicated, not more appealing. Yes, she said. That means no private drivers. No changing my shifts. No sending people to hand me little pieces of expensive paper like my time belongs to you. Adrian lowered his cup onto the saucer with care. You are angry about the envelope. I am not angry, Zuri replied. I am correcting your assumptions. A faint smile touched his mouth. That sounds like anger dressed for dinner. And you sound like a man who confuses being observed with being understood. That should have ended it. That should have been the line where he went cold, where the evening snapped back into the shape power preferred. Instead, Adrian leaned back and folded one arm over the other, studying her with a kind of patience that felt almost respectful. Then correct this one too, he said. What assumption am I making now? Zuri held his gaze. That I am impressed by rooms like this. That because the table is polished and the candles are expensive, I will forget you arranged all of it without asking what I wanted. Rain shivered harder against the window, soft but steady, the city beyond reduced to streaks of reflected light. Adrian glanced briefly around the room, as if seeing it through her eyes for the first time. Dark walnut walls, silver flatware, cream linen so crisp it looked untouched by ordinary life. You think I brought you here to impress you, he said. Did you not? No, the answer came fast, flat, and surprisingly bare. Zuri blinked. No. Adrian's eyes returned to hers. If I wanted to impress you, Miss Bennett, I would have done it badly and on purpose. Men who need to impress women usually have little else to offer them. There it was again, that strange edge of honesty from a man who should have been all polish and performance. It irritated her because it made him harder to dismiss. She shifted the empty tray from one hand to the other, suddenly aware of the quiet in the room and the absurd intimacy of being spoken to like this while still wearing a black server's apron. Then why here? She asked. Adrian looked toward the rain-dark glass, the city lights smearing softly beyond it. And when he spoke, his voice dropped low enough that she had to lean in slightly to catch it. Because this is the only place tonight where nobody interrupts me, and I wanted to hear what you sound like when you are not pretending to be polite. Zuri stared at him. For one breath, then two. The words settled between them, simple and direct, with none of the syrup she had learned to distrust in wealthy men. He was not praising her. He was not flattering her. He was telling the truth in the most inconvenient way possible. She set the tray down on the sideboard because suddenly carrying it felt foolish, like armor that had become too obvious. All right, she said. Then hear this clearly. If you want to know me, you do not get shortcuts. You do not get to skip to the part where I trust you because your suit fits and your voice is calm. You show up by yourself. You ask, not instruct. You wait for an answer. And if the answer is no, you leave it alone. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Not calculating. Considering. That distinction mattered more than she wanted it to. You think I do not know how to wait, he said at last. I think men like you never have to. Something moved in his face then, slight, but unmistakable. Not offense. Memory. It passed so quickly she might have imagined it if his next words had not come slower than before. You are wrong about that, he said. But not wrong enough. The room softened around the edges of that confession. Zuri did not ask what he meant. She knew better than to reach toward the private places in another person before they offered them. Besides, if she started wondering about the shadows in Adrian Romano's life, she might forget to guard herself from becoming one more thing he found interesting. My break is over, she said. It was not, but it should have been. Adrian nodded once, accepting the lie for what it was. Then let me try again. Zuri waited. Tomorrow, he said, 7:30. Not here. Not Bellefonte. There is a coffee shop on Lexington and 53rd. Mouth lifted. No driver. No reserved table. No special treatment. I will be there alone. She said nothing. Adrian's gaze stayed on hers, steady as winter light. You can walk in, he added, or keep walking. The offer landed differently from the envelope had. Less like a move on a board. More like an answer to a test he had decided to take seriously. That unsettled her more than arrogance would have. Arrogance was easy to reject. Effort was harder. And if I do not come? She asked. Adrian reached for his cup again, now lukewarm, and took a measured sip before answering. Then I will know honesty has limits too. The line should have sounded smug. Instead it sounded almost weary, as if he had spent too many years in rooms full of people who never meant what they said. Zuri felt a pulse of something sharp and unhelpful move through her chest. Curiosity again. That dangerous, lean thing that made smart women step 1 inch closer to fire just to understand its shape. She reached for the tray and backed toward the door. You still assume I care what you know. Adrian's eyes followed her, but his voice stayed calm. No, he said. I assume you care what you choose. Her hand paused on the brass handle. The hallway beyond the door was dim, quiet, ordinary. This room was not. This man was not. And that, more than anything, was why she needed to leave it. Zuri looked back once, just once, and found Adrian Romano no longer looking like a king at all. Just a man in candlelight, waiting to see whether for once in his life, wanting something would require him to earn it. 7:30, she said, opening the door. Do not be late. Then she stepped into the hallway before he could answer, but not before she heard it, soft behind her, low and certain and altogether too pleased. I would not dare. Zuri told herself she was only going for the coffee. Not for Adrian Romano. Not for the way his eyes had changed when she gave him rules instead of admiration. Not for the quiet, inconvenient truth that some part of her wanted to see whether a man like him could really step out of his own shadow for 30 minutes and mean it. The next evening Manhattan wore that brittle January. Cold that made every breath feel thin and expensive. By 7:25, Lexington Avenue was a river of headlights and dark coats, people rushing past storefront glass and clouds of steam rising from the grates in the sidewalk. The coffee shop Adrian had named sat between a dry cleaner and a corner pharmacy, narrow and warm, and entirely forgettable except for the soft trumpet music drifting through its speakers and the handwritten sign in the window promising fresh muffins that probably had not been fresh since noon. Zuri stopped across the street with her hands tucked into the pockets of her wool coat and looked through the glass. No driver. No bodyguard at the door. No Blacktown car idling at the curb like certainty on 4 wheels. Just Adrian, alone at a small table by the window, a paper cup in front of him and an untouched blueberry muffin beside it. He was not wearing a suit. The dark coat had been folded over the chair next to him, and the charcoal sweater beneath it made him look younger somehow, less polished, though there was no mistaking the stillness of him. Even here, in a place with scratched tables and sugar packets spilled beside the register, Adrian seemed composed enough to alter the room around him. But he did not belong to it. That was the first thing she noticed. The second was that he had arrived early. The third was that he had not once checked his phone. Zuri waited 1 full minute on the sidewalk, just to see if impatience would crack the surface. It did not. Adrian sat with one hand curved around the coffee cup, watching the street through the window with the calm expression of a man who had decided waiting was simply what this evening required. That unsettled her more than if he had fidgeted. She crossed at the light and stepped inside. The bell over the door gave a small tired ring. Heat folded around her, smelling like cinnamon, burnt espresso, and old wood polished by too many elbows. Adrian looked up at the sound. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just stood, as if the gesture mattered. Zuri felt that somewhere below her ribs. "You are on time," he said. "So are you," she replied, slipping off her gloves. "I said I would not be late. You also said the muffins were burnt." Adrian glanced at the pastry in front of him. "I was trying to be honest." That almost made her smile. Almost. She set her bag on the chair across from him, but did not sit yet. "Let me be clear," she said. "This is coffee, not a date." Adrian nodded once. "Understood. And if I leave in 10 minutes? Then I was lucky to get 10. She studied him, searching for irony, for strategy, for the little seams where performance usually split open. She found none. That did not make him safe. It made him harder to read. Zuri sat. The chair wobbled slightly on the uneven tile, which felt strangely satisfying in a universe that otherwise seemed designed around his comfort. Adrian did not comment on her coat, her hair, the absence of makeup beyond a little gloss she had put on without thinking. He did not stare in the way men stared when they believed attention itself was flattering. Instead, he lifted a second paper cup from the table and slid it toward her. "Tea," he said. "No sugar." The woman at the counter said, "Most people who look tired choose coffee." "I guessed you were not most people." Zuri looked at the cup, then at him. "You bought it before I got here." "Yes." "That was a risk. I have been told I make those." There it was again, the dry edge of humor she had not expected from him, quiet enough to miss if she had not been listening carefully. She wrapped her hands around the tea, grateful for the warmth and annoyed by the small correctness of his choice. "You could still be wrong," she said. Adrian leaned back slightly, giving her room instead of leaning in to take it. "Then tell me what I missed." Outside, a bus sighed to the curb. Inside, milk steamed behind the counter, and a college student in the corner laughed softly at something on a laptop screen. The world was so ordinary around them that it made Adrian seem less unreal, which in some ways was worse. Zuri took a slow sip of tea and found it exactly how she liked it. "You missed that I do not enjoy being studied," she said. "I am not a puzzle." Adrian's expression did not harden, but it sharpened. "No," he said. "You are not. Puzzles are solved. You are making me learn patience." A silence opened between them, not awkward, just new. Zuri looked out the window at the passing headlights reflected in the glass. "And how is that going for you?" Adrian followed her gaze to the street. "Poorly." She laughed then, softly and despite herself, and the sound changed his face in a way she had not been prepared for. Not because he smiled. Because he looked relieved, as if for one unguarded second the room had given him something he had not known he wanted. Zuri felt it immediately and looked down at her cup. Dangerous, she reminded herself. This was the dangerous part. Not the power. Not the money. The small human moments that made a powerful man seem reachable. Adrian broke the silence first. "What do you want, Zuri?" She frowned. "That is a large question for bad jazz and paper cups." "I know." His voice stayed even. "Answer a smaller one, then. What are you working toward?" The question caught her off guard because it sounded real. Not "where are you from?" Not "do you like this city?" Not the lazy little questions men used to circle the edges of a woman until they decided what version of her they preferred. He had gone straight to the center. Zuri stared at the steam rising from her tea. "Stability," she said at last. "A month where no one in my family has to choose between groceries and medicine." A year where my brother finishes school without apologizing for every textbook. Sleep would be nice too. Adrian listened without interrupting. And you? She asked before she could stop herself. What are you working toward? The trumpet on the speaker shifted into something lower, sadder. Adrian's gaze dropped briefly to the untouched muffin, then lifted back to her. Control, he said. And lately I am beginning to suspect that is not the same thing as peace. Zuri went still. It was not the answer she expected. It was too honest, and worse, it sounded like something she understood. Outside, the cold pressed against the window. Inside, the tea warmed her hands. The jazz stumbled on bravely, and Adrian Romano sat across from her in a coffee shop no one would remember, looking less like a man who ruled rooms and more like a man who had forgotten how to rest inside one. And for the first time, Zuri realized the challenge might not be teaching him how to arrive without power. It might be discovering who he was when power was the only language he had ever been allowed to speak. For a moment, Zuri forgot about the tea cooling in her hands. Control is not the same thing as peace. The words lingered between them like the last note of a song too honest to ignore. Outside the window, Manhattan kept moving in streaks of white headlights and bundled strangers, all of them hurrying somewhere warm, somewhere known. Inside the coffee shop, the lights were soft, the jazz was still slightly offbeat, and Adrian Romano sat across from her looking less like a man who bent rooms to his will and more like someone who had been carrying himself too carefully for too long. Zuri had met men who performed vulnerability before. They lowered their voices, loosened their collars, and let just enough sadness show to make themselves seem deeper than they were. Adrian did not do that. He did not reach for pity. He did not decorate his truth. He simply placed it on the table and let it exist. That made it harder to distrust. It also made it harder to survive. Zuri set her cup down and leaned back slightly, creating distance because distance was still the smartest thing in the room. That sounds lonely, she said before she could decide whether the sentence was too generous. Adrian looked at her for one steady beat, then two. It is efficient, he replied. That was not my word. No, he said quietly. It was yours. The corner of her mouth shifted, not quite a smile. You always answer like that. Only when I am trying not to lie. There it was again, that strange precision in him. Like every sentence passed through a filter most people never bothered to use. Zuri glanced down at the table. A sugar packet lay torn near his untouched muffin. One of his long fingers rested beside it, still, composed, but not relaxed. She had started to notice small things now. The way he never slouched. The way he listened with his whole attention. The way his calm did not feel casual, but built, earned. That was dangerous knowledge. She did not want to know how a man like Adrian learned to move through the world like that. She wanted to finish her tea, go home, and return to the life she could not afford to complicate. But curiosity, once invited in, did not leave just because it should. So what does peace look like to you? She asked. Adrian's gaze shifted briefly toward the front window, where a little girl in a red hat was laughing as she dragged her father toward the crosswalk. The sight softened something in his face so quickly she almost missed it. Quiet, he said. Not the expensive kind. Not private rooms and locked doors. Just quiet that does not feel guarded. Zuri felt the words in places she had not meant to expose. Quiet that does not feel guarded. She knew exactly what that meant. Quiet was her mother asleep after a hard day. Quiet was Micah studying at the kitchen table with one earbud in. Quiet was the first 10 minutes after sunrise before the city started demanding things. But guarded quiet was something else. That was survival. That was rest with one eye open. You do not have that? She asked. Adrian gave a faint, humorless smile. Not often. Something inside her shifted then, small but undeniable. Sympathy, maybe. Or recognition. Both were risky. She drew a breath and looked away, toward the chalkboard menu behind the counter where someone had written hazelnut latte in looping handwriting too cheerful for January. You know what I think, she said. I think men like you get so used to controlling every variable that you forget peace is not something you conquer. Adrian was silent long enough that she wondered if she had finally pushed too far. Then he said, And what is it? Zuri looked back at him. It is something you make safe enough to stay. The words surprised even her. They sounded like something Dolores Bennett might have said at the kitchen sink while washing dishes in the blue light of evening. Her mother had always talked that way, like truth was not supposed to impress anybody, only hold up under pressure. Adrian did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed on her, pale and unreadable at first, then slowly less so. There was no challenge in them now. No amusement either. Just thought. Real thought. That sounds like wisdom, he said at last. That sounds like my mother, Zuri replied. Then your mother is a formidable woman. She is tired, Zuri said softly. There is a difference. Adrian nodded once, as if he understood more of that than she expected. Tired people usually are. The sentence settled over her with startling gentleness. Zuri wrapped both hands around the tea again, although it was barely warm now. Do you always listen this closely? Adrian glanced down at his cup before answering. Not always. Then why now? His eyes lifted back to hers. The coffee shop noise seemed to dim around them, the milk steamer hissing in the distance, the bell at the door giving a small ring as someone left. Because most people talk to me like they are handing me something polished, he said. You talk like you are trying to tell the truth before it gets dressed up. Her breath caught a little at that, which annoyed her instantly. Compliments from men like Adrian were supposed to slide off if you had any sense. But that had not sounded like a line. It had sounded like relief. Zuri looked out the window again because it was easier than looking at him while he made her feel seen in ways she had not agreed to. That is not always a good thing, she murmured. No, Adrian said, but it is a rare one. A silence opened between them, softer than the others had been. Not empty. Resting. For one dangerous moment, it felt easy. Too easy. Like the distance between their worlds had narrowed not because it was possible, but because neither of them had looked directly at it yet. Then Zuri's phone buzzed against the table inside her bag, sharp and sudden. She pulled it out and saw Micah's name lighting the screen. Her chest tightened before she even answered. What happened? She said. Adrian watched her face change, but did not speak. On the other end, Micah's voice was trying too hard to sound calm. It is Mama. She got dizzy again when she stood up. She says she is fine, but I do not like how pale she looks. Zuri was already reaching for her coat. I am on my way. She ended the call and stood so quickly the chair scraped the tile. Adrian was on his feet a second later, all ease gone, every line of him suddenly attentive. What is wrong? He asked. Zuri shoved her gloves into her pocket with clumsy fingers. My mother is not feeling well. Do you need a ride? The offer came instantly, and because it came so fast, so naturally, she knew this was who he still was beneath all the effort. A man used to solving things by moving resources toward them. Zuri grabbed her bag and shook her head. No, Adrian paused, just one beat, then nodded. No argument. No pressure. Just acceptance. And somehow that landed harder than insistence would have. She turned toward the door, pulse racing, then stopped with her hand on the strap of her bag. When she looked back, Adrian Romano was still standing beside the little window table, his untouched muffin, his cooling coffee, the whole ordinary room suddenly too small to contain the force of his attention. I have to go, she said unnecessarily. I know, he replied. His voice was low, steady. Go take care of what matters. Zuri stared at him for 1 second too long, then pushed through the door into the freezing night. But all the way uptown, with subway brakes screaming and winter air needling through her coat, one impossible thought stayed with her. He had not asked her to stay. He had not tried to make himself part of the emergency. For the first time since meeting him, Adrian Romano had chosen restraint over reach. And that, more than the coffee or the honesty or the strange quiet between them, was what made her heart beat faster than the train. By the time Zuri reached the apartment, the city had turned raw and metallic, the kind of cold that slipped through coat, seams, and settled in your bones. She took the stairs 2 at a time, keys already in hand, heart pounding harder with every floor. Inside, the kitchen light was on, too bright against the chipped cabinets and the tired yellow paint. Dolores sat at the table with a blanket around her shoulders, one hand pressed lightly against the edge of the wood as if she had needed something solid to hold on to. Micah stood nearby in sock feet, trying and failing to look calm. Relief hit Zuri first, sharp and immediate. Her mother was upright, conscious, breathing evenly. But the color in her face was wrong, and the tightness around her mouth told a different story than the brave little smile she offered when Zuri rushed in. I am fine, Dolores said softly, because mothers like her believed reassurance was part of the job description. You are not allowed to say that sentence anymore, Zuri replied, dropping her bag onto the chair and kneeling beside her. Dolores's hand was cool. Too cool. What happened? Micah ran a hand over the back of his neck. She stood up too fast after taking her meds. Got dizzy. Sat back down. She says it passed. It did pass, Dolores insisted. I just got lightheaded. Zuri looked at the half-full glass of water on the table, the prescription bottle beside it, the unpaid electric bill tucked under a coupon flyer, and felt that old pressure close around her ribs. There were too many things in this room that depended on her staying practical. Fear had to stand in line behind paperwork. She checked her mother's forehead, then her pulse, then the color of her lips the way the nurse at the clinic had shown her months ago. We are calling the on-call line, she said. Just to be safe. Dolores gave her a look full of tired tenderness. You always go straight to battle mode. That is because somebody has to. Micah was already reaching for the magnet on the refrigerator with the after-hours number. They made the call. They answered the questions. They were told what Zuri had expected to hear. Monitor her, push fluids, bring her in if the dizziness returned or the weakness worsened. Nothing dramatic. Nothing solved either. By 11:15, Dolores was in bed again, the blanket pulled up under her chin, her breathing steadier now. Micah retreated to the kitchen to heat canned soup neither of them really wanted, and Zuri stood alone in the hallway outside her mother's door, staring at the faded family photo on the wall. It had been taken at Coney Island years ago, back when her father was still alive and the future had looked hard but not yet expensive. In the picture, Dolores was laughing. Micah was missing a front tooth, and Zuri was squinting into the sun with one hand over her brow, as if even then she had suspected life was coming for them fast. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. For one irrational second, she thought of hospital billing, of the pharmacy, of some fresh demand from the universe with poor timing. Instead, the screen showed an unknown number and a single text. I hope she is all right. No name. No flourish. Just that. Zuri stared at the words until the hallway seemed to go quieter around her. She had not given Adrian her number. That fact landed first, cold and clean. Then the second fact landed right behind it. He had not asked what happened in detail. He had not written anything grand or invasive or polished. Just one line. I hope she is all right. Micah appeared in the kitchen doorway holding 2 bowls. You good? He asked. Zuri slipped the phone face down into her hand. Yeah, she said automatically. He looked at her expression and knew better. That means no. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but had no humor in it. It is nothing. That is also never true. He set the bowls on the table and leaned against the counter, studying her with the same Bennett family honesty that made secrets feel flimsy. Is this about the man? Zuri looked up sharply. What man? Micah lifted an eyebrow. Zuri, I have known you my entire life. There is definitely a man attached to that face. She should have denied it. Instead, she pulled out the phone and handed it to him. Micah read the text, then looked up slowly. He sounds worried. He sounds informed, Zuri said. That is different. Micah read it again. You never told him your number? No, then how did he get it? That was the question, was not it? Zuri took the phone back, thumb hovering over the screen, heartbeat slowing into something colder. There were only so many ways a man like Adrian Romano could have found a number connected to her. None of them were harmless. None of them belonged in the narrow sacred spaces she had tried so hard to keep separate from men with power. Her family, her home, her mother in that room at the end of the hall. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the radiator louder, the city beyond the window less like background noise and more like 100 locked doors. I do not know, she said, but the answer sat heavily in her chest. She knew exactly how. The wrong way. Micah watched her carefully. Do I need to be worried? Zuri thought of the coffee shop, the paper cup warming her hands. Adrian standing when she walked in. Adrian not arguing when she left. Adrian listening as if truth itself were rare enough to deserve silence. Then she thought of the text glowing on her screen like proof that even a man trying to come without power still carried it into the room without noticing. No, she said at last, though the word felt uncertain. I need to be careful. Later, after the soup had gone cold and the apartment had settled into the fragile quiet of sleeping people and humming pipes, Zuri stood by the living room window with the phone in her hand. Snow had started to fall over Harlem, soft and sparse, catching the streetlights as it drifted down. The city looked gentler like this, its edges blurred, its demands briefly hidden. She typed 3 words. She erased them. She typed again. How did you get this number? She stared at the message for a long time before sending it. The reply came less than a minute later. Too fast. Honest answer? Zuri's jaw tightened. She typed back immediately. Only that. 3 dots appeared. Vanished. Returned. Then his message arrived. I asked someone at the restaurant to confirm the number attached to your employee file after you left. I wanted to know your mother was safe. No excuse. No apology tucked inside charm. Just the truth, clean and incriminating. Zuri closed her eyes. There it was. The line he had crossed because his version of care still traveled through access and assumption. He had broken the rule without meaning to, which somehow made it worse. People who ignored boundaries on purpose could be fought. People who crossed them while thinking they were helping were harder. Her phone buzzed one last time before she could answer. I know that was not your rule. And standing there by the window, snow falling. Past cracked glass, her mother asleep down the hall, Zuri realized the real test had arrived sooner than she expected. Adrian Romano had not lied to her. He had simply reached too far. And now she had to decide whether a man who could admit the truth was more dangerous than one who would have hidden it. Zuri did not answer right away. She stood at the window with the phone in her hand and watched the snow come down over the street in slow white flecks, each one soft enough to look harmless until you remembered what cold could do when it stayed too long. Behind her, the apartment had gone quiet again. The heater knocked in the wall. A cab rolled through the intersection below. Somewhere in the building, somebody laughed too loudly at a television joke. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. The kind that reminded her what she was protecting. On the screen, Adrian's last message still glowed in the dark glass. I know that was not your rule. No defense. No polished justification. Just the truth, set down at her feet like an object he knew might cut him. Zuri should have appreciated that. A lesser man would have lied. A smoother one would have twisted the moment into concern so noble it was supposed to excuse the intrusion. Adrian had done neither. And still, he had reached into a place that was not his. That was the problem with powerful men. Even when they told the truth often arrived with fingerprints on the lock. Her thumb moved over the keyboard before she had fully decided what to say. You do not get to care about me in ways I did not agree to. She sent it. The reply took longer this time. Long enough to tell her he was thinking, which somehow irritated her more than speed would have. When his answer came, it was short. I know. Zuri stared at the 2 words and felt anger rise clean and bright through the exhaustion of the day. I do not think you do, she typed back. You asked me to be honest. Here it is. You crossed into my life like access was the same thing as permission. I do not care that you meant well. That is not respect. The snow thickened outside, softening the glow of the streetlights. Her phone stayed still, in her hand. Then, you are right. No explanation followed. No careful defense. Just those 3 words. The honesty of it should have cooled her anger. Instead, it made room for disappointment, which was worse. Disappointment meant she had expected something from him after all. She pushed the curtain aside with one finger and looked down at the sidewalk, where a woman in a red scarf hurried past with grocery bags pressed against her coat. Life kept moving. Rent would still be due. Her mother would still need another refill next week. Adrian Romano's self-awareness did not change the fact that he had brought himself too close to the things she loved without being invited. She typed one more message. Then we are done with this. She hit send before she could rewrite it into something softer. The phone remained silent. No dots. No appeal. No final line designed to pull her back in. That silence followed her to bed and sat on the edge of the mattress while sleep refused to come. The next morning, Belafonte felt overlit and overcareful. Trevor was already in a mood by the time Zuri tied her apron, and Elena took one look at her face and wisely asked no questions. The lunch crowd came early, all tailored coats and polished impatience. But the real shift in the room had nothing to do with customers. It was in the glances, the little pauses, the way conversation tightened when she entered the server station. Zuri had worked enough dining rooms to recognize when her name had started traveling without her. She was balancing 2 cappuccinos and a lemon tart when one of the hostesses, a pretty girl named Mallory with nervous hands and a weakness for gossip, caught her near the point-of-sale terminal. So, Mallory said, trying to sound casual and failing, is it true? Zuri did not stop walking. Is what true? Mallory trailed after her 2 steps before losing nerve. That Mr. Romano asked for you again, and you turned him down. Zuri kept her expression flat. People should try minding their own tables. But it was too late. The whisper had already formed its own legs. By 3 o'clock, she felt it everywhere. In the way a bartender from the lounge smirked when she passed. In the curious stare from a busser who usually barely noticed her. In the too sweet tone of a regular customer asking whether she had special friends now. Belafonte had always run on hierarchy, polish, and secrets. Now Zuri had become one of them. She was in the side station folding napkins when Mrs. Delacroix appeared again, wrapped in cream cashmere and the perfume of someone who had never rushed for a train a day in her life. She set down her handbag with deliberate grace and looked Zuri over from head to toe. "Still here," she said lightly, as if surprised a stain had not been removed. Zuri kept folding. "The restaurant opens most days, yes." Mrs. Delacroix's smile sharpened. "I suppose some girls mistake attention for elevation." There it was. Not loud. Not crude. Worse. Precise. Designed to leave a mark without ever raising its voice. Zuri placed the linen square on the stack and met the woman's gaze. And some women mistake cruelty for class. The older woman's eyes flashed. "Careful." "I am," Zuri said. "That is why I know the difference." For one suspended beat, the air between them went tight as piano wire. Then Mrs. Delacroix leaned in just slightly, close enough for her words to land low and private. "Men like Mr. Romano do not look at women like you for long," she murmured. "When they are done being entertained, the room remembers where everyone belongs." Zuri's fingers curled once against the edge of the counter. Not because the insult hurt, because a small, ugly part of her feared the world sometimes agreed with women like this. That was the poison of class. It did not just exclude you. It whispered that your exclusion was natural. She lifted her chin. "Then it is a good thing I do not take my place from rooms like this." Mrs. Delacroix stared at her for a beat too long, then picked up her handbag and turned away with a little laugh that had no joy in it. The moment she disappeared into the dining room, Elena slipped into the station looking horrified. "What is wrong with these people?" she whispered. Zuri exhaled through her nose and reached for another napkin. "They panic when the furniture starts talking back." Elena made a startled sound that turned into a laugh. But when she looked at Zuri again, her expression softened. "You okay?" Zuri glanced toward the dining room where light bounced off crystal and polished cutlery and money disguised itself as manners. Somewhere in that city, Adrian Romano was going on with his day, and for all she knew, he had accepted her message and stepped back like she asked. That should have made things cleaner. Instead, his absence sat inside the room like a pressure nobody else could name. "I will be," she said. But even as she spoke, Trevor appeared at the station entrance, pale and tense in a way she now understood too well. "Zuri," he said quietly, "there is something you need to see." He held out his phone. On the screen was a reservation notice from one of Belafonte's private event partners, a name she did not recognize at first, then did. Romano Holdings. Tonight. Full upper room. High-profile guests. No public announcement. Zuri looked up slowly. Trevor swallowed. He reserved the whole floor. The restaurant noise seemed to thin out around her, all at once. After everything. After her message. After her drawing the line as clearly as she knew how. Adrian Romano had not texted back. He had not argued. He had simply moved his attention somewhere too large to ignore. And standing in the side station with a linen napkin in her hand and gossip still clinging to the walls, Zuri felt the first real crack in her certainty. Because if Adrian had come back to Belafonte tonight, he had either not heard her at all, or he had heard her perfectly and chosen a response she had not yet learned how to defend against. For the rest of the afternoon, Belafonte felt like a room waiting for weather. The reservation notice sat in Zuri's mind like a stone dropped into still water, its ripples reaching everything. Romano Holdings. Full upper room. High-profile guests. No public announcement. Trevor tried to act as if it were just another booking, but his hands gave him away. He straightened place cards twice. He checked the wine inventory 3 times. He snapped at a busser for polishing silver too slowly, then apologized so quickly it only made everyone more nervous. By 6:30, the upper dining floor had been transformed into a study in controlled elegance. Fresh white roses, candlelight caught in mirrored walls, crystal lined with military precision. The kind of room built to flatter people who expected to be obeyed before they even sat down. Zuri stood in the service corridor with a tray of champagne flutes balanced on one hand and watched staff move in tight, efficient lines. She should have been focused on table assignments, on timing, on making it through another shift without giving the city anything else to take from her. Instead, her mind kept circling the same question. Why reserve the whole floor after she told him it was over? Not why come back. Why like this? Elena, carrying folded menus against her chest, stopped beside her. Maybe he is making a point, she said quietly. Zuri did not look away from the room. That is exactly what I am worried about. Elena lowered her voice further. You think this is about you? Zuri wanted to say no. She wanted to be sensible and small and impossible to notice. But Belafon had already decided otherwise. I think men with that much power do not often separate business from message, she said. Elena exhaled softly. That is not comforting. It was not supposed to be. At 7:10, the guests began to arrive. Men in dark suits and women in silk and winter diamonds floated in beneath the chandeliers with the ease of people who had never had to wonder whether a card would decline. Their voices were low, their smiles polished, their eyes sharp. Zuri moved among them with a tray of champagne, feeling the old discipline settle over her shoulders like armor. Smile when required. Listen always. Reveal nothing. But even in the rhythm of service, she could feel it, the slight difference in the room tonight. The curiosity, the awareness that something invisible and personal had entered with the guest list. A woman in emerald satin accepted a flute and murmured to her companion, not quietly enough, that must be the one. Zuri kept moving as if she had heard nothing. At 7:28, Adrian Romano walked in. The room did not gasp. People like this never did. They simply adjusted, subtly. And all at once, as if gravity had changed direction. Adrian wore a midnight suit tonight. Severe and perfectly cut, no overstatement, no flash. But it was not his clothes that altered the air. It was the quiet. The immediate, disciplined quiet that followed him through the doorway as conversations softened to make room. He acknowledged handshakes, accepted greetings, inclined his head at compliments he clearly did not value. Then, for the briefest moment, his eyes found Zuri across the room. He did not smile. He did not hold her gaze long enough to expose anything. But he saw her, completely, and then he looked away. That unsettled her more than if he had stared. Throughout the first course, he kept to his table at the center of the floor, speaking with an older man from finance and a silver-haired woman whose expression suggested she considered warmth a structural weakness. Adrian did not summon Zuri. He did not ask for special service. He barely looked in her direction. If this was a performance, it was a strange one. If it was a punishment, it was too restrained to read. By the time the main course was served, Zuri's confusion had sharpened into irritation. She hated being off balance more than she hated being watched. Then the speech began. Trevor had mentioned there would be remarks, something corporate, something about expansion and philanthropic initiatives that would look excellent in print tomorrow. A small stage had been set at the far end of the room beneath a wall of candlelit glass. As the final entree plates were cleared, the room quieted and a man from Romano Holdings stepped to the microphone. He spoke for several minutes about growth, community investment, and responsibility. It was the language powerful people used when they wanted virtue to look measurable. Zuri listened with half an ear while collecting silver from table 4. Then the speaker said Adrian's name and invited him forward. Adrian rose, straightened one cuff, and crossed to the stage under a hush so complete it felt rehearsed. He thanked the room in a voice as controlled as ever, low and even and impossible to interrupt. He spoke briefly about business, about stewardship, about building things that outlasted ego. Zuri did not want to listen. She listened anyway. Then Adrian set his notes aside, though she had not seen him use them once, and the room shifted. Before tonight concludes, he said, there is one thing I would like to make clear. Something in his tone made Zuri look up fully from the tray in her hands. Adrian's gaze moved across the room, not dramatic, not searching, just measured. I have spent many years in rooms like this, he continued, and I have learned that elegance is often mistaken for character. It is not. Wealth is often mistaken for worth. It is not. And power is very often mistaken for permission. It is not. The words fell clean into the silence. Across the room, Mrs. Delacroix, seated near the stage in a white silk blouse and cold pearls, went visibly still. Zuri felt her own pulse in her throat. Adrian's face remained calm, but there was steel under every syllable now, quiet and unbending. Any institution I attach my name to, he said, will be expected to understand one simple principle. The people who serve you are not beneath you. They are not scenery. They are not opportunities for cruelty disguised as manners. And if anyone in my company, at my table, or in a room funded by my name cannot meet that standard, they are welcome to leave it. No one moved. No one so much as touched a glass. Zuri stood frozen beside table 4 with the silver tray balanced against her palm, the entire room suspended around her like held breath. Adrian did not look at her. That was the point. He did not make a spectacle of her. He did not drag her into the spotlight to prove a message. He placed the principle in the center of the room and made every person there measure themselves against it. Mrs. Delacroix's mouth tightened into something pale and brittle. The silver-haired woman at Adrian's table looked almost offended by the existence of moral clarity. Trevor, standing near the service station, had gone completely still. Adrian let the silence stand for one long beat before continuing in a calmer tone. Respect that requires convenience is not respect. It is performance. I have no use for performance tonight. Then he thanked the room, stepped away from the microphone, and returned to his table as if he had merely commented on the weather. The applause came late and uneven, the kind people gave when they were unsure whether they were clapping for conviction or warning. Zuri did not clap at all. She could not. She was too busy trying to understand what had just happened. He had not chased her. He had not excused himself. He had not demanded forgiveness or buried the issue in private charm. He had done the one thing she had not expected from a man like Adrian Romano. He had taken the lesson she gave him and aimed it at his own world instead of at her. Elena appeared at her side with wide eyes and whispered, "Did he just do that because of you?" Zuri looked toward the center table, where Adrian sat once more with one hand beside his untouched wine and his expression composed as stone. This time he did not seek her out at all. He simply resumed the evening, as if truth once spoken had no need to be repeated. "No," Zuri said softly, though her heart was beating too hard for certainty. "He did that because he finally heard me." And for the first time since this impossible story began, Zuri Bennett understood that Adrian Romano was not trying to win her by overpowering the room. He was trying to prove he could change the shape of it. The applause faded slowly, uncertain and thin, but the silence it left behind stayed sharper than sound. Zuri moved through the last stretch of service as if the floor beneath Bellefonte had shifted half an inch and never quite settled back. Glasses were cleared. Dessert menus were offered. Checks were printed on crisp cream paper and signed by people pretending the room had not just been made to look at itself. Yet every time she crossed the upper floor, she could feel it now, not the old kind of attention with teeth in it, but something quieter, something chastened. Mrs. Delacroix left before dessert, her pearls cold against her throat, her smile so brittle it looked painful. No one stopped her. No one needed to. The judgment had already landed where it belonged. Adrian remained at the center table until the final coffee service, speaking little, listening more, his expression unreadable to everyone except perhaps Zuri, who was beginning to understand that his calm was never emptiness. It was choice, deliberate, costly, and tonight, for the first time, he had used that power not to pull her closer, but to draw a line around what he would no longer allow. That was why it reached her. Not because it was grand, because it was restrained. Near 11, the last guests drifted out beneath the chandeliers in a soft rustle of wool coats and polished goodnights. Staff began the quiet work of resetting the room. Candles were lowered. Silver collected. Linen stripped from tables with practiced efficiency. Zuri carried a tray of untouched champagne flutes toward the service station when Trevor caught her near the back corridor. His usual anxious energy was gone, replaced by something like awe. "He wants a word," he said carefully. Zuri looked past him. Adrian stood alone at the far end of the hallway near the rain-dark window, jacket buttoned again, one hand in his coat pocket, the other resting at his side. No associates, no audience, no stage, just a man waiting. Trevor, to his credit, disappeared without another syllable. Zuri set the tray down and crossed the corridor slowly, every step measured, the quiet between them full of things neither had earned the right to say too quickly. Adrian looked at her as she approached, and the force of his attention was different tonight. Less pursuit. More regard. You did not have to do that, she said. Adrian's gaze held steady. Yes, he replied. I did. The answer came so simply that it undid something in her before she could guard against it. Zuri folded her arms lightly, more for balance than defense. You could have made that speech in a boardroom. I have. That is not what I mean. A faint shadow of understanding crossed his face. No, he said. It is not. Rain traced the window behind him in silver threads. Somewhere below them, midtown traffic murmured through wet streets and red taillights. Adrian looked out at the city for one brief second before returning his eyes to hers. You said I confused power with permission, he said quietly. You were right. I could tell myself I crossed that line because I was worried, because your mother mattered to you, and I knew that should matter to me. But concern does not excuse intrusion. Intent is not the same thing as respect. Zuri felt her heartbeat in her throat. He was not defending himself. He was naming the wound exactly where it had opened. That mattered more than apology dressed in regret. So this was what? She asked. Adrian's expression did not change, but his voice lowered. This was me choosing to correct myself in public because private understanding is cheap if it changes nothing. The hallway went still. Zuri looked at him and saw, all at once, both truths she had been trying to hold apart. Adrian Romano was still dangerous, still powerful, still a man who could alter rooms just by entering them. But he was also trying, with an effort that cost him something visible, to become less careless with the lives he touched. That did not erase what he was. It did not make her safe, but it made him real in a way fantasy never was. You are learning, she said at last. Adrian gave the smallest nod. Slowly. That must be difficult for you. For the first time, an actual smile touched his mouth, brief and tired and unmistakably human. You have no idea. She almost smiled back. Almost. The dangerous thing was that she wanted to. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket. Zuri stiffened instinctively, but all he pulled out was a folded piece of paper, worn once at the edge like it had been opened and closed more than once. He did not offer it to her right away. His thumb rested against it, almost absently. There is something else you should know, he said. Something in his tone changed the air at once. Not drama. Wait. Zuri's pulse slowed. What? Adrian looked down at the paper for half a beat, then back at her. The first time I saw your last name in the employee file, I thought it meant nothing to me. His eyes held hers, pale and steady and suddenly far older than the room around them. I was wrong. Zuri did not move. The hallway, the rain, the low hum of the city below all seemed to recede around the quiet force of those 2 words. Adrian extended the folded page toward her. Bennett, he said softly. It is not just your name. It is part of my family's past. Zuri took the paper slowly, fingers brushing the edge of expensive stationery gone strangely soft with handling. Her chest tightened before she even opened it. Inside was an old newspaper clipping, copied and reprinted, the black and white image grainy with time. A younger man in a suit stood on courthouse steps beside another man whose face, even through the blur of age, carried Adrian's eyes. The headline above them was small, but sharp enough to read. Civil case reopened after witness intimidation claims. And beneath the article, circled in dark ink, was a name that made the floor beneath Zuri seem to tilt. Isaiah Bennett. Her father. She looked up so fast the paper trembled in her hand. Adrian had not moved. My father was involved, he said, each word measured, impossible to take back. And if I had recognized the name sooner, I would have stayed away from you until I knew exactly what that meant. Zuri stared at him, rain whispering against the glass, the clipping cold in her fingers, her father's name opening like an old wound in a hallway that seconds ago had almost felt safe. In that moment, she understood the cruel shape of what came next. The challenge had never only been whether Adrian could approach her without power. It was whether either of them could survive the truth once the past finally stepped into the room.